Hello, we're back on Lee Chess, gonna play 5 more games of 3 Minute. Last time I played pretty badly and was quite lucky to get an eventual 3.5 out of 5. Hopefully this time I can play a bit better. Let's start with a Caro. Been having fun with these. Okay, so against the exchange, I'm gonna play a quick fianchetto. If they take on d5, I'm just gonna ignore it for a while. I guess at this point I'll take on c4 because their bishop has to spend the extra tempo. And then maybe bishop g4. If they play h3 though, then I should want to have to take. And while I can take d4, they take b7 at the end. So maybe just knight c6 first. I never quite know how to play these positions because it's hard to get a lockdown on d5. So maybe something like knight a5, b6, bishop b7 is an appropriate way to control the square in front of their isolated pawn. Not sure. Let's play b6. I'm glad I have e4 under control, otherwise bishop e4 could make the rook feel kind of awkward, because rook b8, bishop f4, and suddenly it's trapped. But I'd like to play bishop b7, maybe e6, and just really solidify my control here. Maybe knight d5 at some point. Is there any reason not to play knight d5 immediately? Knight d5, bishop e4, I can just take on c3 and then win the bishop. So, okay, knight d5. Hits the bishop, but more importantly, knights are really good pieces in front of isolated pawns. They blockade it very well, and unlike other pieces, they get this nice control on squares around it that can work nicely. If they take, I will take back queen, threaten mate. Seems decent. So I could take on e5 and take on e3 and leave them with a kind of shattered pawn structure. Yeah, let's... Or I could just play something like rook c8. I like my position, so maybe I'll go the non-drastic way. I won't make a big structural change yet. But I may have missed my opportunity too, because now if they play like queen d2, suddenly it doesn't exist. They did not. So now I can ruin their structure and trade queens. And with queens off, I think it's much harder for them to get activity that they might have around my king with my dark squared bishop off. So I feel significantly more comfortable playing for the structural advantage now. I also think my bishop's great here, because the knight to e4 or d5 could hit some awkward squares, and that was no entry into the game. So f6 or f5, I think I want to go f6, because if I go f5, white might have this e4 play against it, and I don't want to give white easy ways to get rid of their pawns. They do have rook d7 now, but I think I just take and play bishop c6. I can also just play king f8, but then rook d1. So I guess I'll take. And I think they have trouble defending the pawn. Probably they should have played bishop e5 first, but then I just have a6 and b5. So how do they keep the pawn? Bishop g4, f5. Ah. Okay. Now they can come to e6. Okay, then I might have f5 and king f6, though. So let's play knight d6 first, control b5 so that b5 doesn't leave my bishop awkward, and also break the rook's connection. And now I think I'm just threatening to take on d7. Though bishop takes, rook takes, they can try to play against the pin with knight b5, but I can probably just evict because I have the knight well defended. So I think I should just be winning a pawn here. I'm sure I mishandled that a little, but now we have a, I think, comfortable position I can push for a win. It's really helpful that my bishop thoroughly dominates their knight right now. The knight doesn't have a good path. It's possible they should just do something like knight e2. Just whenever you're in doubt in a position, just like find a way to improve your worst place piece. And their knight was dominated. Of course, after this trade, now the knight does have new options. So this does make some sense. I guess I can think of rook c7, maybe knight d5 is annoying because my rook needs to stay defending the pawn. Not too scared about e5, I just take. So maybe king f7, have the king defend this pawn, prepare rook c7, and infiltration to c4 or c2. If e5, I just take it. Now if knight d5, probably rook c4 really hits all his pawns. Probably gonna give up this pawn. Okay, I can just take. Alright, don't want to give them the file. If they come back to the E file, then I just have E5. And if they come to the F file, I have F5. And my pawns are winning time and, improving their position. So I guess knight e4, keep improving my pieces. To get their rook in, they have to move their knight, and if they move their knight, the pawn hangs. So they do get their rook active now. I don't want to play king f6 because of knight d5. Okay, that's important. So maybe I have to play king e8. Alright, I did miss that I didn't have king f6 there. Maybe rook d4. Stop the knight having access to, useful squares. Now I'm going to hit the knight away. Ooh, I gave it knight g4. Yeah. Ooh. Alright, I guess if they take here, I have f3. Can defend that. Maybe look to push the b pawn. Do I have a trick? Can I play knight g3 and rook h1? Oh, well, this way they hang the rook. I thought I had a mating net. Now I just got to play fast. Right, they can't actually attack anything of value. Hopefully, yeah, they hang the knight. Now their king has 2 squares, and I will make a queen and then bring it to h1. Alright, 1 for 1. I think the opening just went quite well. Just they had to deal with the isolated pawn. I think this knight a5, b6 strategy ended up being a pretty reasonable way to contain the pawn. Let's go with 1e4. Best by test. I think high-level computer play, human play 1d4 and 1c4 and 1 knight f3, I think all score very slightly better than 1e4. But I think in high-level computer play, a lot of computers do like 1e4 nowadays. Worth noting, I guess. Probably not entirely relevant. And if you look at the top players in the world at the moment, a lot more of them are 1e4 players than 1d4 players. Like, Caruana's 1e4, Carlsen has been playing more 1e4, Ding Liren is 1d4, Aronian has been switching to 1e4 a lot, which he did not used to play in the past. MVL has been 1e4, people like Karyakin are 1e4. Okay, I think queen b6 is an interesting offbeat move here. And my idea is kind of to take and then play e5, and if they take, play bishop c5. Okay, not familiar with this. I'm just going to prevent their advance. Often white goes queenside in these fantasy variation lines. The f3 line is called the fantasy, and I feel this pawn structure certainly hinders them going for it. Now I can get my bishop out of the chain. Maybe they can use the g4 pawn, so maybe I just want to start undermining their chain as quickly as I can. Play c5, play knight c6. They never have takes in b4 because I have the a5 pawn, and they also don't have takes in bishop e3 because the f2 pawn is awkward. So I guess I'll play bishop d7. Just start thinking about taking on d4. Also, I just threaten knight takes e5. That's a typical tactic that I think occurs a lot. I guess I'll take d4 first. That occurs a lot at kind of lower levels. Like specifically, I had this kind of tactic show up so much. Also, this one's cute because I'm on the bishop as well. But, I mean, that's the reason it works, because this bishop's defended. If it wasn't, though, that kind of tactic occurs just so much at a certain level. And if you're sharp spotting it, really helpful. I think I'll just... Ooh, d5's hanging, so I guess I'll take... Can I just play e6? Let's just play e6. Still on the bishop. But it kind of knight takes e5 with the idea of defending d7 when a piece is not really pinned anymore because a bishop got in the way. Just really frequent tactic. Knight c6. b4 is a nice hole for me to put a bishop or knight on because they can't contest it with a pawn. So I'm up a pawn here, and I think with a very pleasant position. This f3 pawn is bad. They'd love to have the knight there. This is, I think, a big problem with the fantasy variation, is there's some pawn sacrifices where you get exciting play we could look at after. But if you don't get that play, you just put your pawn on f3, and it's just not... It's not a very good pawn. Okay, so they're threatening knight takes d5 again. I can play knight takes d4. Bishop takes, king takes. Some risk, but I'm also getting in on b3 at the end if I want it. I don't mind this, I don't think. Yeah, let's go for it. Much more circumspect would have been something like bishop e7, breaking the pin and ready to take back knight. But I had ambitions, and hopefully I will not be penalized too much for them. Ah, they're coming into b5. Ooh, my king does really lack squares. Okay, so my queen controls f4. So if they play queen b5, I think I can try to come to b8. Alright, now ooh, they're trying to get to f4. Yeah, good point. Good point. Alright, so I think I have to play queen c5. If bishop f4, I'm going to go back to d8 now. But I really started asking for it, this whole knight takes d4 adventure. I also have bishop d6. I think I want my king on d8. Because I thought knight b5 at an opportune moment. But I guess the knight was pinned, so that was probably silly. Okay, how to free ourselves, how to extricate. I'm going to start by stopping queen takes f7. I expect knight b5 here. Okay. As long as they let me bring out my pieces more, I'm happy to try and do so. Let's ask their queen what it's doing. Their knight's now free to move, so I want to quickly start playing against their strongest attacker. How to get my king to safety. Guess I'll block stuff off so I can move the bishop. Bishop coming maybe to c5, maybe to b4, maybe to d6. I can block this check. Alright, gotta go fast now, and it is a difficult position to play. I do have some pressure on c3, given that my queen's now on the b file. And they can't avoid the queen trade, which I just didn't notice. So now I can start freeing myself. The knight will come to c4, my bishop to f6, my king will probably step to e7. a6, I guess I want to play rook a8 immediately while they have trouble defending. Okay, I don't see anywhere else to go. If knight takes d5, e d5, rook d5, I can just defend d6. They can't add much pressure to it. I would expect something like knight d4. Okay, I can defend that. Up in exchange, down on the clock. What can you do? Gonna double on the b file if I get the chance. And that will threaten e5, driving away the only defender of b3. I can try to prepare it. Maybe play g6 so they don't have knight f5 check in response. I will now drive away the knight and then try to drive away the rook. Maybe king to e4 coming next. Ooh. Alright, check them back so my king can join in. I should have played rook c2 probably last turn. They can now distract my... Okay. And we got them. Alright, 2 for 2. Haven't looked at the fantasy variation for a long time, but I thought there was an odd queen b6 idea. So the point of this is if I take on e4, if white takes back, they get this, lovely looking game. And black tries to strike with e5, and the point is if white takes, queen h4 check, forks the king and the pawn, and white's king will be forced on a hunt, because g3, when they take the pawn, will now fork king and rook. So, white's idea is if black takes, white gets a really nice center. Now you'll notice what are the main moves for black. It's either d-e4 with specifically the idea of this e5 break. Or more commonly, people just play e6, and yes, the bishop's not getting out of the chain, but this pawn isn't so good. So I went for queen b6, which I think is a move. Yeah, queen b6 is a move, and you'll notice it scored very well. And knight c3 is the main move, but black has this idea of taking and playing e5 against things to sacrifice the e-pawn just to get this great pressure on the diagonal both on f2 and g1. So here I decided to just block the pawn's advance. It seems that I should have instead played a solid move like e6, or perhaps e5 the computer is suggesting. Ooh, Now white can take. This is interesting, because I've committed my pawn to a5, I don't have a6. So when they take and force me to take back, they have this b5 square forever. That's interesting. My opponent missed this. I saw maybe bishop f5's not doing much, and decided to undermine immediately. Ooh, again interesting. White has c4 and can open up the game favorably. Yeah, I'm a little pushed back. So I definitely handled the opening wrong, but after this position was reached, I was pretty happy. I saw this trick with knight takes e5. They have to take back bishop. And from then on, have a nice game, though I'm sure I squandered it at some point. All right, 2 for 2. Nope, not bullet. 3 minute. I played the fantasy for a little as white, which is why I'm somewhat familiar with moves in it, having never really played the Caro can until this past few days of recording. But I remember playing the fantasy for a bit as white, and I found if people played into the theory, I quite liked the positions I got, and if they didn't, like, my pawn's just bad on f3. So this is a weird line against the Alekhine with, or sorry, against the Scandinavian with knight f6, where white checks and then brings the bishop back to e2, and then gets this big pawn center with d4 and c4. I think it's pretty reasonable. I'm never exactly sure what to do with the center. Am I looking to play d5s? I don't know if it really works, but actually let's try it here, because they've made this extra move with the bishop, and I feel opening up with their king in the center and still multiple moves away from castling could be favorable. Because I always have like a little annoying rook e1 insertions. I didn't mean to click e4 to f4. Okay, in this case, yeah, let's take on e6. They have to give up another tempo with the bishop. They're still many moves away from castling, with maybe knight b5 coming. That seems quite annoying for them to meet. They might have to play like a6 or c6 here. They did not. So how are they going to defend knight b5? And bishop f4. I just feel it's one of those positions where even with queens off, white is just like 3 or 4 tempo up in development. Like, it seems small tempo. Ooh, okay. But I just feel white should be able to turn that into some kind of initiative or create a weakness. Like if I can win the c7 pawn, or I can give them this isolated e6 pawn, that I should be able to turn what's like a temporary initiative into a static advantage of a pawn to target or a material advantage. And even without queens, I feel just the advantage in time, I'm going to try to inflict more weaknesses, should be pretty good. If they castle, I probably have to want to retreat. I don't think I want to play bishop c6, because after bc6, my knight and bishop will be hanging. So I'm just going to retreat and say, I've created this weakness, and I still have a little pressure, even not counting that weakness. Do I want to insert bishop c6? If bc6, I have knight a7, and if ab5, I can just take on b7 with the bishop, I guess, or take on b5. We'll probably take on b7 there. And knight a7 will pick up the c6 pawn. And I think I'm actually very pleased with how I've handled this one. Because I think I took what looked like a relatively minimal advantage, and I'm now suddenly up 2 pawns, and I'm on c7. And if I play a4, this pawn phalanx is just very strong. Ooh, okay, nice move. Good way to break up my pawns. So I'll play, I guess, rook c1. Would rather take on c7 with the rook than the bishop, because the bishop's going to need to control f2. There's going to be a lot of potential weaknesses there. Get the pawn to b7, I think, is the next goal. I can't really hold on to this, because if rook b2, rook d3, I get back ranked. Okay, so they're very aware of what the threats are. Now, I can play rook g7 and bishop b8. Yeah. That seems good. We are now up 3 full pawns, so even if we lose some, I have high hopes for this position. I'll throw in a check. Got to be careful not to get back ranked, so we'll probably play g3 after. Yeah. Oh, did I give myself not many ways to defend my b pawn? Yeah, so they might try to now reposition against the f2 pawn. That was the right one to play first, because I could play bishop a7, against the rook first move order. Huh. Alright. Bishop a7, I go into a one pawn up position. Don't love it. Bishop f4 to bishop to e3 is the other kind of way of dealing with it. And then my king's stuck on the back row forever once they come to b2. So I'm going to go from being 3 pawns up to 1 pawn up in another masterful display of just abysmal technique. Their pawns are broken up. I'm still pretty hopeful of being able to push this position. I'm going to play rook a5, so they never have h5 to drive away king g4. And I'm going to play king g4 and f4. Okay, they can do it this order. Fair enough. I guess I'll push their king to the corner and then try to play f3 and g4. They should play rook c3. And then I might play rook e5, and I think it's... they probably just give the pawn. Do they care? Okay, I'll play f4, intending to play rook e5 soon. g4. Oh, I've bungled this. Alright, I'm going to try g4. They should throw in rook c3, I think. They didn't. Now I have a little more room to advance my pawns. King g5, rook c5. So how can we do this? If f5, they take with check. So let's just spend a turn giving them a chance to do something silly. They're not obliging. Okay, I'll play king g5. If they check, I'll come back. Okay, really, really bungled this endgame again. I was 3 pawns up. Alright, 2.5 out of 3. Should probably look back at that endgame. I used to be a pretty bad endgame player, and I think I've turned into a fairly good one, but I have not been showing it on stream recently. I've been playing very poorly against any attempted activity. We already had this line. I'm going to go for the same thing, d4 and c4. I've never learned anything else against the knight f6 lines. I think I've only had it once in an actual tournament. I was rated, I think, around 2100 at the time, and I drew a 2170. Just like reasonable result. It was in a team tournament, and one of my teammates, his opponent missed mate in 1, and my opponent laughed at him for a long time, and it was quite entertaining. This d5 break worked really well last time. Here, I think, knight b4, and they're going to be able to target it. Their king's out of the center. I should not still consider it. Maybe I could play a3 and b4 and just look to expand. It's not obvious where my play or where my breaks are, but their knight does look a little silly on c6, blocking their c-pawn. So I may have knight b5 options sometimes too. I also might like to include h3 just so knight h5 doesn't make this bishop feel silly. Okay, let's start by expanding though. And then if I get a free turn and I don't see something active to do, h3 seems a way to improve my position. Alright, this pawn's a little vulnerable. I guess I'll play passive. If I had gotten in, instead of playing a3 and b4, played queen d2, I'd have time for something like rook d1, and that seems a better way to defend it. Now I'm a little passive. Maybe I can still bring out the queen somehow, though, because if bishop takes... Okay, now I definitely can. So I'm going to bring out the queen, prepare to get the rooks behind. I don't really want the queen tied to defensive duty, was my idea. Okay. If knight b6, queen b3, I keep c4 under control. I don't want bishop f3 to remove the defender. Right. I don't know what they're doing, but I feel like this trade, I start looking at b7. I really start wanting the d5 break, because their queen and my rook on the same file looks, to my eyes, very vulnerable for them. I can also play b5 and try to assault this diagonal. I've come to like my position. You know, a little more space. The center gives me a clear target. Really always nice to have a clear target in a position. I guess queen takes. Just hit b7. Could be wrong. Might give them time for a6, b5. So if queen takes b7, queen takes c4 is the idea. So I guess I'm just gonna I don't want to hang a3. Maybe c5. Yeah, I have d5 well under control, so I'm not surrendering a key square. This cuts their bishop off from being annoying and reduces pressure on c4. And now I'll just... I'm in no rush to win the pawn immediately. I'm just trying to slowly add a little pressure to them. Maybe sometimes g3, bishop f4 makes sense, just because this diagonal is kind of hard for them to fight on. Alright, that's clever, because if I take cb6 en passant, they take on c3. Is there any reason I can't take on a6, though? My bishop on f3 controls their rook square, and if they went to a8, I'd still have queen b6. And now I threaten something like knight takes b5, and then I have to imagine my queen can get out. Guess now I take on d5. I'll take with the knight first so the bishop can control a8. Now, I failed to win before, went up, 2 pawns. So... yeah, I mean, let's keep taking. Why not? Could have taken on e6 first, but I thought there after rook takes b5, they have rook a8, which probably isn't a worry, but... do I have anything cute? No need. Just keep my bishop controlling the a8 square. We're once again in this opening up 3 pawns. Should be able to manage it. Hopefully can this time. Queen d6 forces queens off. Alright. Let's pretend we have some semblance of technique. Of course, keeping queens on, perfectly reasonable, but I would like to prove I can win a 3-pawn up position. Look to get my rook into c7 or c8. Yeah. They probably should have played bishop e5. I probably should have prevented that. Okay, not a problem. Would like to play bishop g4. Okay, well, can play it next turn now. I really hope they meant to... okay, there we go. Alright. I think that's 3.5 out of 4. So, let's go for one more. I think I've only gone 5 out of 5 once, but 4.5 out of 5 is pretty good too, so another win, and this will be a nice session. Even got a little closer to 2400. Let's play the bird. Aim for the polar bear. I tried this bishop b5 idea last time I played the bird. Okay, I mean, I'll take. Sure. Let's just say you're spending a lot of turns over there. I will try to take over the center. No need to immediately look to grab stuff, though I'd, be pretty tempted to play bishop g5. I would guess e6 comes here. Now, knight f3, g4 might be a little annoying, so let's just keep just normal development moves. Knight c3, bishop d3, or in this case, I guess bishop e3. Maybe look to play d5 sometimes. Queen d2, castle queens. Huh. I'm really tempted to take. Yeah. And then play queen d2. I just think the pawn here with the knight on c6 isn't so good. You might equally argue my knight and pawn aren't a good combination. I agree, because moves like bishop b4 will be annoying. I just feel bishop b5, knight f3, I'm on g5, knight e5 comes. You can also castle queens. They're a bit away from castling. Maybe start with knight f3, because if g4, knight e5... Ooh, did I blunder bishop h4 there? I might have. My point was knight takes, pawn takes, and I'm on d5. They should probably have played bishop h4, because if I play g3, they can take, and my pawn's pinned. Now I will try to load up on d5. They should play c6. I've given them an easier path out than they should have had, and my knight's just not good. So let's improve it. Let's play knight e2 and go to d4 or f4 and try to inconvenience their bishop. Their knight is also not good. Alright, I should hold on to the pawn, I think. Intending knight d4 here. Which bishop is more important to get rid of? I think in the long run, I'm going to make the guess that it's the dark squared bishop. That's better for them, with their pawns all on light squares. I'm not entirely sure, but this way I threaten knight e6 and bishop g4. So I think they're fairly likely to take. Now I'm on a7. I guess I'll renew that. Yeah. Am I getting anywhere? Not really. Let's put my rook on a better square. I have the two bishops. That's something. Maybe I should play bishop g3 to threaten bishop takes g4. Oh, that's not good. I'll take a pawn. All day, every day. Now with this passed a pawn. And the two bishops. Maybe bishop g5 might be annoying for them to meet. Alright, let's keep the pawn. Okay. This is my problem pawn. How do I solve it? Maybe come back to h1. That seems a bit silly. If I wish I could pressure this pawn a little more, tie them down to it. Not sure how. It's not at all obvious to me where my play comes from, but I think I need to start opening lines. I'd like to play bishop g4. I think their bishop controls a lot of critical squares that I can start threatening invasion on if I trade off what I believe is their best defensive piece. So I can play bishop f5, e6, and win an exchange. Yes, I should do so. Always a little worried about trading into the opposite bishop's position, but this one looks pretty damn safe. Because, of course, it is no longer opposite bishops, it's now just up an exchange. And I have two passed pawns, so yeah, they just resign. Alright, 4.5 out of 5. Cheers.